Hello, my name is Kyle Hammonds, and I'm sorry that I can't be with you for the conference in person this year, but I am very excited for the opportunity to share a little bit about what I have been learning through experience with teaching instructional podcasts. And I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about my background in teaching with media. This is something that has been important to me for a long time. When I started graduate school and was working as a teaching assistant, I started thinking about things like movie and television clips that I could share in classes to help students kind of contextualize and understand concepts. And this interest grew and grew, and it became a major part of my research trajectory to try and understand the best ways of using pop culture and media texts and artifacts to sort of contextualize and give students an accessible entry point into learning about topical content. So this culminated in something that I call the pedagogy of communion. This is something that I have written about with Dr. Karen Anderson Lane at the University of North Texas. And the idea behind the pedagogy of communion is that my classes tend to be situated such that all of the conceptual content I want to discuss will be able to connect to some kind of centralized media example, and having that example gives students the opportunity to kind of have equitable ground from which they are learning. So everyone can refer to the same examples and then connect that to their own experiences outside of the class, which means that we have kind of a common starting point before expanding outward. So the connections outside of class are important as well, but then having that common entry point is very important for me. There are three aspects of the pedagogy of communion. There is relevancy to the content, so whatever media artifact is selected. So Batman Year One is a graphic novel that I like to use when teaching introductory communication content, and that was selected because many of the concepts from the communication textbooks and the basic coursework that I like to use are clearly evident to me in reading the book, and so I know that it will be something that I can use with students without having to really stretch myself to make the content fit. It's just I see natural connections there, so that gives me some advantage as a teacher. So also there is temporal currency, which is the idea that students can see something about their lives or their experiences or the current time in which they live within the artifact itself. And then problem posing potential, which is taken from the work of Paulo Freire and the notion that these texts should cause students to think and reflect on their lives beyond the text. So I have primarily used movies and graphic novels in teaching in the past. However, I have recently had the opportunity to start branching into podcasting, and some of this was ushered in by the opportunity to write a chapter in a book called True Crime in American Media, where I was able to talk about the Atlanta Monster podcast and communication concepts related to the Atlanta Monster case. While I was working through all of this and trying to figure out my exact approach to teaching with media, Dr. Garrett Castleberry shared with me that he had been working on a class in which he was using podcasts as a central part of the pedagogical approach. So I was fortunate that Dr. Castleberry invited me to work with him on a few of these podcasts for Mid-America Christian University, and specifically his course on mythic media, in which he tries to pull out cultural concepts, cultural studies concepts from contemporary media. It's a very interesting, very cool course, and I was excited for the opportunity to talk with him about and collaborate with him on the podcasts. So this class began to, this class was offered during the COVID-19 pandemic, which prompted Dr. Castleberry to look for ways of expanding the possibilities for how to teach the course. So offering virtual options, of course, became very important during that time. So the one of the advantages of teaching these virtual courses with podcasts is that we can focus on student pathways. That was certainly a standout to me. In other words, students can engage over things like concepts or themes in the class. They can engage particular text artifacts in which they have choices in the course, or they can focus on both, or they can look to other things. The idea behind the podcasting was that it allows students to either follow a central path, so a particular set of modules that give students the sort of basic foundational experience, or they can choose to explore an array of texts, a kind of choose your own adventure style, where maybe instead of looking at the same media artifact the entire way through the class, they can choose to go down whatever rabbit holes, for lack of a better term, they decide to in examining different artifacts that help to build their knowledge. So maybe everyone in the class, for instance, has to read the Dark Knight Returns graphic novel. But for each of the modules, there are alternate texts to examine that students can also pull in and use that to give additional examples or provide further context to what they're learning in that particular module. So maybe someone decides they want to read a portion of Batman Year One, and they want to listen to our podcast episode about that particular story for that subject or module. It gives students the opportunity to kind of choose what they are most interested in. Everyone still gets the same basic conceptual content, but it gives them the opportunity to pick things that are most interesting to them and helps them have choices in how they learn the particular content. So as an instructor, I found particular advantages to be associated with podcasting as opposed to other traditional ways of conducting, especially online courses. One of the things that was very interesting and grew to be very important to me in working together with Dr. Castleberry was that he likes to podcast with co-hosts. This means that there is a difference from traditional lecture casting, where a person, for better or worse, sort of gives a monologue to the students. The advantage of doing podcasting versus lecture casting, in my opinion, is first that there is a greater sense of dialogism. That means, of course, that the instructors can actually learn from each other in the course of conversation. There might be some pre-structured things about the content of a podcast that they have prepared, but in the process of talking through the subject with each other, the professors can make discoveries as they go along in conversation with each other with the podcast. And additionally, I believe this brings a sense of dynamism. That is, there are more cues for attention, and it breaks up the lecture style that can perhaps become monotonous for certain students. So these would be advantages for students and listeners, but also as an educator, this process has been very encouraging to me. It tells me that I need to do additional research on a topic and refresh my memory on particular media texts before engaging in conversation with the co-host. And also, it tells me that I need to begin forming arguments about these texts. It teaches me to work as an active reader when I am engaging media. And then finally, it helps me to engage with other scholars. So it's not just me forming thoughts in isolation, but I get experience with other people and responses from other people, which helps me grow as well. So the process of academic podcasting has been I think, helpful in democratizing the educational experience. It becomes available through an array of media. It gives students choices on how and when to listen. It gives them options on what kind of artifacts they want to connect with to learn about the content. But also individually as an educator, I am benefited in a number of ways. So these have been helpful in my experience all around for all of the parties involved. I have had a great time collaborating with Dr. Castleberry on the Mythic Media class, and I strongly recommend exploring the co-hosted dialogic podcasting versus traditional academic lecture casting. I think it gives a lot of interesting possibilities for students, especially in virtual contexts, and this will be something that can be a strong educational tool as we continue to explore new ways of teaching and delivering content in the future.